Hello, good morning. Welcome to Business on News Desk. We begin with a big story this morning. Some commercial banks in the country could lose their licenses later this week as the deadline for meeting the capital requirement of 400 million cedis comes to an end today. There are speculations that over 20 banks have raised the amount, but we will get confirmation in the coming days from the central bank. Joining me to discuss this is Joy Business researcher Philip Namfuri. 31st is already here.
A big deadline.
Yeah, the big deadline is already here. Let's first begin with the background.
Okay.
Why we are having to talk about recapitalization in the first place.
Okay, so last 2 years, Bank of Ghana, that's between 2015 and 2016, Bank of Ghana conducted what they call their asset quality review, and they saw that banks were going through some challenges. So as part of the reforms to bolster strength in the banking sector, they decided to increase the minimum capital requirement from 120 million to 400 million, and that's where we are now. Last year, when the directive came out, Bank of Ghana says you have two options, or a combination of these two options. Either you look for fresh capital, or you convert your profits or your excess money you've made into your capital, or any combination of both. And during the course of this year, we've seen that a lot of banks have been, I'm sure you heard, converting their profit into their capital or raising money from their investors by through issuance of fresh shares or raising from the already existing investors.
Okay, so right now, as we know it, over 20 banks have met the capital requirement. Some have put it at 22 banks.
Yeah.
We've heard from analysts who are surprised about the numbers. Are you surprised yourself?
Well, I would say yes and no. Yes, because let me go back to Nigeria. They had over 80 banks some time ago, and then they also increased the minimum capital requirement, and we saw this number come down to about 2022. Some were expecting to see this major mantra in the country where they increase the minimum capital. But it seems they've been very, very innovative, and they found the money to meet this minimum capital requirement. So that, previously we had 36 banks, then we had UT Capital go down to 34, then we had these 5 also go down this year, and now we have 30 banks in total. So people were saying that, okay, this number has come down, but they were seeing that it will come down further. But I don't think the 400 has been able to bring all of these banks together.
Juxtaposing this to the Nigerian situation where they had over 80 banks, and then when they had to do the recapitalization, they had how many? About 29?
Currently in Nigeria.
Currently in Nigeria.
Yeah, I think I'll put it at 25. I'm not very sure.
25 banks.
25.
What does this say about our banking sector?
Okay, so Nigeria is very big, bigger markets, bigger numbers, bigger population, etc. We are not there in terms of size, even of our GDP, of our economy, and etc. But it just means that the banks are willing to do what they must to stay in business. And apart from addressing the key issues, which was the non-performing loans and all that, that's Bank of Ghana says, okay, you know what, increase your minimum capital. We can just say that, okay, you know what, the banks have tried their best to stay in business, because somebody may not want to give off his business to somebody else and wants to do his best to maintain what he has with regards to an investment.
Okay, so we have just a few hours before the deadline comes to an end. Do we know what happens to banks that fail to meet the capital requirement? Okay,
so whilst I was going through the bank sector report for November, just released last week, Bank of Ghana says the minimum capital requirement deadline, which remains unchanged as at end of this, as at end of today. So we can't tell what exactly the Bank of Ghana would do, but it appears from the report, from the line I read, they are maintaining a tough stance. So either you meet it, or as we had in the course of the year, you step down to a savings or loans, or you fold up.
And we're getting reports, I mean, as of last week, that the central bank may soften its stance when it comes to the matter. We were expecting the central bank governor to address us on the 2nd of January. There are some reports that say that the central bank could extend for those banks that are trying to meet the capital requirement. What do we know so far about what's going to happen?
Okay, so now, like I was saying just now, we can't really tell, but Bank of Ghana has all the powers to do what they think must be done to ensure that the banking sector is robust and strong. So if they feel that these banks can demonstrate a goodwill to meet this 400 million, then I'm sure they have all the powers to do so. If they think these banks can't, then I'm sure they would crack the whip.
And speak of that, we know there are some banks that are working out mergers. We know about First Atlantic and
First National Bank.
First National Bank, because we're getting reports that First National Bank is in talks with GHL Bank. And we also heard last week that First Atlantic Bank was in talks with
Energy Bank.
And we know, I don't know how far the ADB one is going right now, but we are seeing these possibilities of mergers. And right now, we don't know how they're going to turn out, but we also know that the central bank has given a no objection to some of them, right?
Yeah. So, yes, and this is all, some will argue that, yeah, this is to meet the minimum capital requirements. We're also hearing that some of them is not because of minimum capital requirement decisions. All in all, we should see some fair amount of consolidation at the end of the recapitalization process. And like you said, we'll get details when the governor speaks to us in the coming days. And we're looking forward to this.
Okay, so our countdown has begun. Hopefully, by the end of the day, we'll know how it's looking like. And so we'll bring you some more updates. But let's talk about this latest banking sector report that is out that you have been going through. What does it say, Philip?
Okay, Daryl, essentially, the banking sector, according to the Bank of Ghana's report, is fine. One, the minimum capital requirement drive, together with their ongoing reforms. You know, during the year, they released a raft of directives. And just last week, they also firmed up the corporate governance directives. All these together are going to ensure that in the coming year, the banking sector is robust. But there was one interesting bit. Due to the non-performing loans in the banking sector, we see that the banks have dipped in how much they give to you and I as loans and have increased how much they spend on investments in treasury bills and securities. But Bank of Ghana says this may change in the coming year when we have the full force of the minimum capital requirement on the ground, together with the reforms they've implemented, so that banks will have more appetite to take on more risk.
I'm sure some people are watching and then wondering, just trying to make sense, because you've seen a very turbulent year for the banking sector, and now this latest report saying there's improvement. How do you, make sense of these two different situations that we are seeing pan out?
That's understandable, but we should also bear in mind that this turbulence was as a result of the Bank of Ghana wanting to clean up. So before your room gets clean, it's going to get a bit dirty. And we've seen the reforms by the Bank of Ghana, raft of directives. We can't list all of them here today, but we've seen that all these from the report are showing that, yes, compared to last year, October 2017, to this year, there have been some significant improvements. Like I mentioned also, they're shifting away from lending because of the risks. We've seen that even though, for example, we can say that their outstanding credit has reduced just because of the fact that there are risks in lending. But going forward, we should see that these things will be corrected, as the report is saying, and we should see a more robust and strong banking sector.
All right, thanks very much indeed, Philip. Now, we continue to monitor developments as again, we are just a few hours to the end of the deadline for meeting the minimum capital requirement. My name is Daryl Carl. That's it for Business on News Desk.